Less than a year ago, almost nobody outside of West Africa could find this country on a map. A lot of people didn't even know it existed. And this year, that same country came within one goal in extra time of knocking out the reigning world champions in front of hundreds of millions of people watching at home and asking each other the same question: where on earth did this team come from? We're talking about Cape Verde, an archipelago that, believe it or not, didn't exist for anyone 600 years ago. And I mean that literally. Not a single person living there, not one human being had ever set foot on that land. And somehow, that completely empty rock in the middle of the Atlantic became the birthplace of one of the most beautiful, most heartbreaking music traditions on the planet, home to a volcano that was still erupting a few years ago. And the single biggest surprise of the 2026 World Cup, the most watched sporting event in human history. Today, I'm giving you 10 facts about Cape Verde, counting down from 10 to 1, so you finally understand who these people are and why they suddenly showed up in the middle of the global conversation. And I'll tell you this right now, fact number 1 is so hard to believe that even after I walk you through it slowly with the receipts, part of you still won't fully accept it. There are people inside the football world who still haven't processed what happened. But let's do this in order, because every single one of these facts builds on the last, and together they explain how a handful of forgotten islands in the middle of the Atlantic ended up writing one of the wildest stories in modern history. So we've lived in Dubai now for 2 years, and we made the decision to come to Dubai for two reasons. So we've lived in Dubai now for 2 years, and we made the decision to come to Dubai for two reasons. And if you're the kind of person who likes discovering these hidden gems, tiny countries nobody bothers to look at, sitting on enormous stories, stick around to the end, because that's exactly what this channel does. Hit subscribe right now so you don't miss a single one. Fact 10. It started with nobody. Cape Verde began with literally nobody living there. I'm not exaggerating for effect. Think about almost any country you know. There were always indigenous peoples, ancient tribes, some civilization that left its mark long before Europeans ever showed up. Here, nothing, not one single inhabitant. These 10 volcanic islands, sitting about 370 miles off the coast of Senegal in the open Atlantic, stayed completely uninhabited until Portuguese sailors arrived in the middle of the 15th century. Picture that moment. You've been on a wooden ship for weeks, no modern instruments, navigating by the stars, and you land on a piece of earth that no human being has ever walked on. No old fire pits, no stone tools, no abandoned village, nothing at all. A blank canvas sitting in the middle of the ocean. So we've lived in Dubai now for 2 years, and we made the decision to come to Dubai for two reasons. So we've lived in Dubai now for 2 years, and we made the decision to come to Dubai for two reasons. So we've lived in Dubai now for 2 years, and we made the decision to come to Dubai for two reasons. So we've lived in Dubai now for 2 years, and we made the decision to come to Dubai for two reasons. When you think about Mexico or Peru or basically anywhere in the Americas, the story starts thousands of years before any European arrived, with entire civilizations already living there. Not here. Cape Verde's history as an inhabited place begins the literal day a Portuguese ship touched land. Before that, wind, volcanic rock, seabirds, and a silence that had lasted who knows how many thousands of years. And that one detail, which sounds small at first, completely changes how Cape Verdeans understand themselves. They don't see themselves as heirs to some pre-colonial past that needs reclaiming, because that past never existed for them. Their identity was mixed from minute one. Everything Cape Verde is today, the people, the language, the food, the way they dance and sing, was built from zero, blending what European colonizers brought with what later arrived from across Africa. In the most literal sense possible, this is a country that had to invent itself from day one. So we know ancient temples to visit, no ruins of a lost civilization, no legends about kings who ruled these lands centuries ago. The only genuinely ancient thing in Cape Verde is the volcanic rock itself, formed long before any human existed to tell the story. Fact 9. A hub of the slave trade. And speaking of what arrived after the Portuguese, that takes us somewhere much darker, but absolutely essential to understanding who Cape Verdeans are today. For nearly 4 centuries, these islands were a key piece of the transatlantic slave trade. So we've lived in Dubai now for 2 years, and we made the decision to come to Dubai for 2 reasons. Thousands upon thousands of people were brought here by force from across West Africa, held in inhuman conditions, and then shipped onward, very often across the ocean to the Americas. The city of Ribeira Grande on the island of Santiago was for a long time one of the busiest ports in that entire system. Its ruins are still standing today, protected as a historic site, a permanent reminder of what happened there. It's not an accident that there's now a museum dedicated entirely to telling that story bluntly, with no decoration. Cape Verdeans understood that denying that chapter would mean denying themselves. Out of that painful history comes a huge part of the mixed identity that defines Cape Verde today, a deep blend of African and European that shows up in people's skin, in the food, in the customs, and, as we'll see in a minute, in the music that made the country famous worldwide. It's a historical wound the country doesn't hide or try to clean up. Just the opposite. They name it openly as a foundational part of who they are, their own particular blend, born out of tragedy, but turned over time into something that exists nowhere else on Earth. Fact 8. Independence and what came after. Cape Verde won its independence from Portugal on July 5, 1975. After almost 500 years of Portuguese rule, the archipelago finally became a sovereign nation in charge of its own future. And it wasn't a simple or peaceful process from the start. It came after years of political struggle and an independence movement that was also fighting for the freedom of other Portuguese colonies in Africa, like Guinea-Bissau, with whom Cape Verde even shared a single political party for a while. When independence finally arrived, Cape Verde had to start from absolute zero as a nation. No oil, no major mineral deposits, volcanic soil that's brutally hard to farm, recurring droughts hammering the population, and no great power standing behind it propping up the economy. And still, against every prediction any analyst would have made at the time, Cape Verde is recognized internationally today as one of the most stable democracies on the entire African continent. No civil wars, no coups, peaceful transfers of power between opposing parties, and an institutional stability that plenty of countries with far more natural resources have never managed to hold on to. Over the decades, that same effort let Cape Verde officially graduate off the UN's list of least developed countries, something very few African nations have ever pulled off, and move into what international bodies classify as middle-income status, driven mostly by tourism, fishing, and, as you're about to find out, money sent home every month by Cape Verdeans living abroad. From nothing, depending on nobody, through pure work, organisation and patience, this tiny archipelago built one of the most solid and respected democracies in Africa, and did it in a region where neighbouring countries went through coups, armed conflicts and institutional collapse over and over again. Fact 7. An active volcano watches over everything. Cape Verde has an active volcano. And not just any volcano, it's the highest point in the entire archipelago. It's called Pico do Fogo. It sits on the island of Fogo, whose name literally means fire in Portuguese, and it rises more than 9,200 feet above sea level. This isn't a dormant volcano that's been quiet for centuries. It's erupted multiple times throughout its history. The most recent and most violent eruption ran from late 2014 into early 2015, when rivers of lava moved slowly, but without stopping, for weeks, swallowing 2 entire villages that ended up buried under volcanic rock. Hundreds of families had to abandon everything within hours. And yet, just a few years later, a lot of those same people moved right back next to the volcano, because to them, that black, dangerous soil is, contradictorily, the most generous land they know. And here's the strangest part of all. Despite the obvious risk, there are communities that have lived for generations inside the crater itself, growing vineyards in that extremely fertile volcanic soil, packed with minerals the lava left behind over the years. They produce a local wine there that travelers and sommeliers describe as one of the most unusual things they've ever tasted, because it's literally grown on cooled lava, in black soil that anywhere else on the planet would mean total destruction. It's a perfect snapshot of Cape Verde as a whole, a place where nature is harsh, unpredictable, and sometimes outright dangerous, and where people find a way to pull life, beauty, and in this case a genuinely good wine out of it anyway, wine that now gets exported to other countries. And since we're talking about people who live inside a crater, here's my first question for you. If you had to live in a village built inside an active volcano, knowing full well it could erupt at any moment, because it already has, would you stay for the unbelievable landscape and the incredibly fertile land? Or would you be gone the second you found out about the risk? Drop your answer in the comments. I read them and I actually want to know. And while you're down there, if you're enjoying this so far, hit the like button. It genuinely helps push these stories out to more people who, like you, enjoy learning something new about the world. Fact 6. They speak a language that exists nowhere else. Cape Verde has a language that's entirely its own. Nothing else on the planet sounds quite like it. The official language, the one used in government documents, formal education, and the media, is Portuguese, a direct inheritance from almost 5 centuries of colonization. But the language people actually speak in the street, the one they use to tell jokes, to argue, to fall in love, and to sing those heartbreaking songs I'm about to tell you about, that's Cape Verdean Creole. Locally, it's called Crioulo. This language was born from the mixture of the old Portuguese the colonizers brought with them and the various African languages that arrived with enslaved people during the colonial period. And this is important. It's not a dialect. It's not some simplified or broken version of Portuguese, the way some people assume. Many linguists consider it a language in its own right, with its own grammar, its own conjugation rules, and even significantly different variants depending on which island you're standing on. Someone from Santiago in the south doesn't speak quite the same way as someone from São Vicente in the north, even though the two understand each other perfectly. So it's a living language that keeps shifting and transforming generation after generation, and it captures better than anything else that blend of worlds that defines Cape Verde. Not fully African, not fully European, but something genuinely new that was born right there on those 10 islands in the middle of the ocean. In fact, there's a growing movement inside the country pushing for Crioulo to stop being just the language of the home and the street, asking for it to be made an official language alongside Portuguese, so it gets the same respect in schools, on television, and in government paperwork. For a lot of Cape Verdeans, especially younger ones, speaking Crioulo isn't a cultural footnote, it's the most honest way of saying who they actually are. Fact 5. There are almost no rivers. Cape Verde has practically no permanent rivers on most of its islands. Rainfall is scarce and unpredictable, and drought has been a painful constant throughout the country's entire history, severe enough at certain points in the past to cause devastating famines. Famines that forced thousands upon thousands of families to emigrate simply to survive. We're coming back to that because it's absolutely central to understanding this country from the inside. Today, a large share of the drinking water the population uses doesn't come from rivers or natural lakes at all. It comes from desalination plants that turn seawater into water you can drink and cook with. It's expensive, energy intensive, and complicated to maintain, but it's necessary in a place where nature simply doesn't provide enough fresh water on its own. And despite that brutal limitation, almost impossible to imagine for those of us who grew up surrounded by rivers and lakes, Cape Verde has managed to develop a genuinely surprising subsistence agriculture in the wetter zones of its interior mountains, growing coffee, sugarcane, and tropical fruit in small green valleys that contrast violently with the dry, volcanic landscape of everything around them. So we've lived in Dubai now for 2 years, and we made the decision to come to Dubai for two reasons. So we've lived in Dubai now for 2 years, and we made the decision to come to Dubai for two reasons. So we've lived in Dubai now for 2 years, and we made the decision to come to Dubai for two reasons. There are even islands like Santo Antão where residents built by hand, generation after generation, miles and miles of irrigation channels carved directly into the mountainside, designed to capture every last drop of water falling in the highest zones and carry it down to the crops below. Walking those trails today is one of the most staggering experiences the archipelago has to offer, because every yard of those channels represents hours and hours of manual labour stacked up across entire generations. Fact 4. Their music conquered the world first. Cape Verdean music conquered the world long before the football team did, and in an equally improbable way. The archipelago's signature genre is called morna. It's slow, melancholic, saturated with longing. It tends to be about goodbyes at the harbour, about the sea as both enemy and provider, about distant loves, and about that deeply Cape Verdean word, saudade, that heavy feeling of missing something or someone who might never come back. Morna emerged sometime in the 19th century, blending African musical roots with Portuguese and Brazilian influences. And it found its greatest ambassador to the world in one single woman, Cesaria Evora. She was known everywhere as the Barefoot Diva, because she always performed barefoot on stage. Didn't matter if it was a small bar in Mindelo or a packed theatre in Europe. Cesaria carried this music from a country of barely 500,000 people to the biggest stages in Europe, Asia, and the Americas. She won top-tier international awards and got compared by critics to absolute legends like Edith Piaf and Billie Holiday because of that deep, warm voice that sounded like it had actually lived through everything it was singing about. In 2019, several years after her death, UNESCO officially declared Morna an intangible cultural heritage of humanity, formally recognizing that this sad, beautiful music, born on a handful of islands the world spent centuries ignoring, is actually a treasure belonging to all of us. Cesaria Evora died in 2011 on the same island where she was born, but her voice is still playing today in airports, cafes, and concert halls across half the world, and the international airport on her home island carries her name, with a statue of her greeting every single person who arrives, like she's welcoming them into her own house. Fact 3. More of them live abroad than at home. There are more Cape Verdeans living outside Cape Verde than inside it. Read that again if you need to, because it's not a rounding error and it's not me exaggerating. So we've lived in Dubai now for 2 years, and we made the decision to come to Dubai for two reasons. So we've lived in Dubai now for 2 years, and we made the decision to come to Dubai for two reasons. But it's estimated that more than 1 million, and by some counts as many as 1.5 million, people of Cape Verdean origin live scattered across other countries. Mainly the United States, Portugal, the Netherlands, France, and Senegal. Cape Verdeans affectionately call that enormous overseas community the 11th island, like it's just one more island in the archipelago, except this one has no physical territory. It's spread across the entire planet. Why did that happen? Exactly because of what we just talked about. The droughts, the recurring famines, and the lack of opportunity pushed wave after wave of entire families for more than a century to look for a future somewhere other than their own land. Some of those communities are enormous and genuinely old. In parts of New England, especially around Boston, New Bedford, Providence, there are Cape Verdean communities that have been established for well over a century. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren who were born in the US and have never lived on the islands, but who still cook the same food, dance to the same music, and speak the same Criollo their great-grandparents carried across the ocean. Can you imagine belonging to a country where the majority of your own people live on the other side of the world? Many of them having never once set foot on their grandparents' land? How strong does a people's identity have to be to hold together across that kind of distance and that many generations? Drop your take in the comments. I read all of them. And if you haven't liked the video yet, this is a good moment before we get into the last two. And if you want to keep discovering stories about places nobody bothers to look at but that have a lot to teach us, now's the time to subscribe so the next ones actually reach you. Fact 2. One of the smallest leagues on Earth. That massive diaspora leads us directly to something crucial, because without it, absolutely none of what comes next would have been possible. Cape Verde has one of the smallest and strangest football league systems in the world. The national championship is made up of just 12 teams, which come out of 11 regional leagues spread across the different islands, where more than 100 fully amateur clubs compete in total. It's a semi-professional system with no massive stadiums and no 8-figure budgets anywhere in sight. So the largest stadium in the entire country holds about 15,000 people. In a lot of countries that wouldn't even fill a decent college venue. With infrastructure that modest, it would be completely logical to assume Cape Verdean football could never compete against the giants of the sport. But more than 2 decades ago, the country's football federation landed on a genuinely brilliant strategy. Instead of relying only on talent developed inside the islands, they started systematically searching for the children and grandchildren of Cape Verdean migrants, born in Portugal, France, the Netherlands, Ireland, and the United States. So we've lived in Dubai now for 2 years, and we made the decision to come to Dubai for 2 reasons. That decision, made with patience and a long-term view, ended up flipping what looked like an enormous weakness, having most of your own people living outside the country, into the single biggest competitive advantage in the nation's sporting history. Of the players called up for the World Cup, more than half were born outside Cape Verde, in countries like the Netherlands, Portugal, France, and Ireland. They came to their grandparents' islands as fully formed professionals, developed in some of the most demanding academies in Europe. It's football as a literal bridge between a small piece of land and an enormous diaspora. Fact 1. They made World Cup history. Cape Verde, a country of barely over 500,000 people inside its own borders, qualified for a World Cup for the first time in its history. And it wasn't luck, it wasn't a fluke. During African qualifying, they finished first in their group, above teams with far more footballing tradition, including Cameroon and Angola, closing out the entire campaign with more wins than losses, and a goal difference that turned heads across the whole continental confederation. Then at the World Cup itself, they drew a genuinely brutal group, Spain, Uruguay, and Saudi Arabia. And what they did there was, simply put, historic. They drew 0-0 against Spain, one of the tournament favourites, thanks to a heroic performance from their goalkeeper, who stopped absolutely everything thrown at him for a full 90 minutes. Then they drew 2-2 against Uruguay in an absolute heart attack of a match, going behind on the scoreboard and clawing their way back with unbelievable character. And they closed the group stage with one more draw, this time against Saudi Arabia. A result that got them something no World Cup debutant had ever achieved before, advancing straight to the round of 32 in their very first appearance at a World Cup. There, in the biggest moment the country had ever reached, they ran into the hardest possible opponent they could have drawn, Argentina, the reigning world champions. And instead of rolling over in the face of that gap in pedigree and reputation, Cape Verde went toe-to-toe with them for the entire match, dragging it all the way into extra time in a game that had the whole world glued to the screen, before finally falling by the narrowest of margins, 3-2. An entire country, both the 500,000 living on the islands and the million plus scattered across the planet, from Boston to Lisbon, from Rotterdam to Dakar, celebrated that elimination almost like a victory, because deep down, to them, that's exactly what it was. The victory of proving to the entire world that a small country, born literally out of nothing, forged by slavery, hardened by drought, and sustained by the migration of its own people, can look the world champions in the eye and make them shake until the final minute. And it wasn't only a sporting achievement. Analysts and journalists across the continent pointed to it as the clearest proof yet that African football is growing at a rate nobody can ignore anymore, with a nation of barely 500,000 people turning overnight into the reference point for every small country that dreams of making history. So we've lived in Dubai now for 2 years, and we made the decision to come to Dubai for 2 reasons. Slavery, drought, and migration ended up projected onto screens across nearly the entire planet for a full month. That's real life in Cape Verde. An archipelago that started as completely empty land, without a single inhabitant, and over time became a symbol of resilience, identity, and pride for millions of people scattered across the world. A place where active volcanoes sit next to improvised vineyards, where the music makes you homesick for a place you've never been, where the language was born from the collision of 2 continents, and where now there's also a football story that's going to stay written into World Cup history forever. 10 facts, 10 chapters of the same story. The story of a people who never had anything come easy, who came from nothing, who carried the weight of slavery, who fought drought and the distance of their own scattered families, and who, against every single prediction, found a way to leave their mark on music, on politics, and now on world football. Very few nations this small have achieved this much with this little, and that's maybe the biggest lesson Cape Verde has to offer. The size of a country never determines the size of its story. If you enjoyed this one and you want to keep discovering the most surprising secrets of small countries nobody bothers to look at, but that are sitting on stories this big, subscribe to the channel right now, because the next story we're telling might surprise you even more than this one did.